Hey everybody, and welcome back. You can see I'm kind of deep into a project right now. In today's video we are talking about tips and tricks for removing the transmission and transfer case from an all-wheel drive Toyota Matrix or Pontiac Vibe. This is a first gen Matrix, but I bet it's pretty similar on the second gen as well. This isn't going to be my usual step-by-step tutorial video because frankly I just need this project done. And as well as I already have a video out there, Toyota Corolla clutch and flywheel replacement, that's going to get you 90% of the way to doing this job. This video is going to add in that 10% of tips and tricks to get this different all-wheel drive setup out. And if you don't want to screw up like me and crack things and have to weld aluminum and do all types of really unpleasant mistakes and fixes, then you're going to want to watch through this whole thing and get all those tips that you can. So let's get to it. The purpose of this video is to talk about transmission and transfer case removal, and I'm going to talk about the welding I had to do and what you want to do with these shafts to avoid that. But first I want to go in chronological order. If you're doing this yourself at home, watch that manual transmission clutch and flywheel video. That's going to give you most of these steps. The first difference though you're going to notice is you're going to need to take the sway bar off because you're going to be dropping that subframe. You're going to be tempted to just try and take an impact and hit this here to get this off. Unfortunately, when I did that, all this did is spin. It didn't actually take it off. And so what I had to do is I ended up taking my 6mm hex key here, I put it in, and then I was able to use the wrench here to loosen it up because there is a hex hole in both the top and bottom. However, the one that is here is like really rusted out. So that's the first difference you're going to notice. Another tip is, I went to San Francisco and I picked this up. No, I'm just kidding. Take a syringe with some grease, and you're going to notice that a lot of these are going to be torn. They're really old, and then you're going to be working on them, grabbing them, yanking them around, trying to take them off with tools and things. Just put this up into the rubber. Put a little bit of your own grease in there. You can keep stuff like these rubber joints going for a long time, just greasing them yourself. Let's go over to the other side and talk about the sway bar, the tie rod ends. So you can see we got kind of a Noah's Ark vibe going on where we have two of everything. When you're trying to take these ends off here, you can see what I did here was no fun, is that this guy, I clamped my vice grip on here, and the actual joint here of the tie rod end came off fine, but this nut would not come off, and I was impacting and it was just spinning and spinning and spinning. You can see it didn't hold. So what I did is I ended up breaking this with one of those nut splitters. Bad idea. Okay, this is a M15 by 1.5 thread. M15. You're not going to find this anywhere. I ended up welding it back up. You can maybe see here in the light, and ground it back down so I'm able to use it again. But just don't break this off thinking that, oh, I'm just going to go to the hardware store and buy another one, because you're not. Now you're going to want to use the correct tool, okay? If you take a sledgehammer and you try to hit onto these, you're going to mar the threads up and you're not going to get your nut back on. So just go out there, buy the $30 tool. This thing is really nice and it just pops them out because they can get super seized in here. You don't actually have to take these off if you're just doing what I'm doing here with the transmission. But what I also did is I replaced this bellows, this boot here. On one side it was all torn and leaking. You can also see here is that subframe, which, to be totally honest, it's not nearly as heavy as you might think. It's no big deal taking this down. You also have your drive shaft, which there's 4 bolts at the rear differential, and then there's a center bearing support with 2 bolts. When you do pull that, pull that drive shaft out though, even with the transfer case drained, you're still gonna have some oil leak out, so be careful of that. You can see too my custom exhaust I built in another video I made, doing really good. But this thing here, if it's leaking grease, dust is also going in. If you get dust into these, they're gonna destroy the seals, and then you're gonna replace a whole rack. I just recently replaced a rack on an ES300 Lexus. Not super fun. So what do I have going on here? You can see that I actually left both the rack and the sway bar in the vehicle, and then I just took this right here. I took one of those L brackets. I took a bolt out on that distribution block, used a strap, and I'm just holding them up. This is only pulled forward here just to keep the engine from falling backwards, since it's only held by one mount, which definitely you're going to need to hold it up using a board or something like that. But you don't want to necessarily have to take this guy out. It just adds a ton of work. So if you can do like me, strap it up in there, it's going to save you a lot. Now, as we go along, rust is going to be a consistent problem. As you can see, stuff like this, for example, the shift linkage, this is going to be really hard to take off. So just take the 2 bolts off and take the whole bracket out. Same thing with the throttle cable. You're not probably going to be able to get this off, and you're definitely not going to be able to get this off. And I actually have a video where I put in a new intake manifold gasket, I clean the idle air control valve, new gasket for it, as well as the mating surface. While you're in here, you're already going to want the working room. You might as well just do this basic maintenance type stuff. Same thing with like this little gasket, for example, for the variable valve timing solenoid. There's the part number on that guy. You're going to want to, well, mine anyways was just leaking down the block pretty decent, so I went ahead and did that. But stuff like this, as long as you're in here, you might as well just go ahead and get it taken care of. I'll show you here though as well how I like to organize things. I got my plugs out, I got my notes here on what I was doing, I've got my bell housing bolts, my manual over here, and then all of the hardware things that I've been taking out. You will need a 30 mil 12 point for these axle nuts. Everything else though. Let's move on to the CV axles. This was a big issue in my previous video. Since then I bought both a slide hammer and forks. I do not like the forks as much. I'd recommend the slide hammer. I also do not love these style attachments. They just seem to, it's hard to get them in, especially with how tight things are under modern cars. I much prefer this rope style one, which normally it's crimped at the end. You can see I had to put a screw style one because it pulled out the first time I hit it. I also jammed some material down in under here so that when I bolted it down, it squeeze it tight in there. You're going to slide this on, and then you're going to take this part and you're going to tighten it down so that it's holding on just to this end. You can't pull by this. You got to pull back here, so that's the reason for this attachment. And give it a few hits, it's going to pop out. This C-clip is what holds this shaft into the transmission. This is the driver's side shaft. Now the passenger side shaft, because of that transfer case, it passes through the transfer case. There's a bearing here that supports it, and this is where all of my problems started. This is the big problem that I had during this whole project, is that this bearing right here, the support bearing in the sleeve. I have this one taped off because I was sanding this down. I actually cut this shaft in half thinking it would help, which it did not. We're going to talk about why. You can see here that I've also attacked this bearing thinking that this would help. There's some really misleading forum posts out there. This does not help. Don't even waste your time trying to take this bearing apart this way to separate it from the shaft. You're not going to get them off that way. What you're going to do is you're going to take this shaft. It's going to be hard to show alone, but you're going to hold it like this, and then you're going to take a punch here, and while you're holding it, you're going to take the punch like this, and you're going to use a hammer, and you're going to tap, tap, tap as you rotate, and you're going to tap that sleeve off. However, you're not going to do any of that until you have this shaft out. Let me tell you about getting this shaft out. Now, normally the sleeve is pounded into this aluminum here, and so you're going to be under the car. You're going to see this C-clip. It's going to be on here, and you're going to think, okay, I take the C-clip off, which it'll also be rusty, but you'll get the C-clip off. Then there'll be a bolt. Now, you cannot forget about this bolt. This is why I cracked this one. It's because I forgot about this bolt on the second time. It has a little rubber nub, but it also has a steel pin basically at the very tip of it. Now the idea of that, I mean, this should not come out. This steel right here should be seized, so to speak, press fit into the aluminum. What should happen is that you take the clip off, you take the bolt out, and then this just real friendly like slides out just like that. Now in the real world where we live, this rusts to this 100% seized, okay? 100%. So you're going to be sitting down there, and you're still going to have the transfer case hooked to the transmission. You're still going to have the transmission hooked to the engine, and you're going to be wailing on it and all this business. It ain't going to come out. So separate the transfer case from the transmission. When I drop them together. The disadvantage to dropping them together is the extra weight. There's also a bolt that goes into the bell housing, the engine connection there. you're only going to have about 15 degrees of swing here. So you're going to have to take 2 wrenches and put them together end to end. It's going to be really tricky. I'll talk about this spring later. But update from future David, putting in the transmission and then waiting to put the transfer case on. The transfer case is sticking and binding on the engine block up there. It might be hard to see, but this is currently stuck now. I was using the mallet to try and put it in, and this is not a great situation. So even though there's that blind bolt up there on the bell housing that's going to be a real trick to get in, I would probably recommend you both drop and lift these together. Once you get that out though, you'll be able to drop the transmission and the transfer case together. I would recommend though you just separate them while you're under the car. There is no C-clip on this shaft the way that there is on that shaft because it is already being retained by this bolt. So that means that if you take all the nuts and bolts off here and you get your pry bar in, you should be able to slide this back without too much trouble. Again, I didn't do it that way myself, so I can't comment, but that seems much easier. I was able to use an angle grinder and grind down this part of the block that was catching on the transfer case. There's also a bolt on the cover here that scrapes on the oil pan, but I should be able to get it up now. Not fun though. Definitely just keep those connected. It's going to save you a lot of time. I also slid this bracket off here. I don't believe that you need to do that if you're making this modification, but really it's just not worth it to do this anyways. Put them up together. So you're going to have your transfer case sitting on the ground, separated from your transmission. You're going to have this shaft. It's not going to be cut off though. It's going to be like that one over there sticking out. And you're going to take a sledgehammer. Now you need to pad this, okay? Another mistake I made. I'm very open about this. This video is to help you not make these mistakes, okay? And I will show you as well, if you're curious, how this works. It is very unique. Let me hold this in place. You can see that this shaft actually turns independent of the differential there. It rides on a couple of bearings that are normally lubricated. This one's drained though, so there's enough friction that when I turn it, they spin, but they're not connected. These splines here, very interesting internal splines, supply this differential to send power to the rear wheels. So it's technically not really a transfer case, it's more of a PTO, but that's how that works. And then this shaft independently goes through into the transmission like a standard front wheel drive where it has its own differential and all types of stuff, however it works in there, that supplies the front wheels with their power. So it's just kind of an add-on thing, not like a truck or anything, but it is unique. You can see in there you got your 2 gears, just like you'd expect, you know, pretty standard stuff. Now I took the case off of this one. You don't need to do that. Another mistake. You don't need to do that because all I'm going to have to do now is scrape all of this RTV off and then reseal it. I thought that with these stuck together, I was thinking, well, what if there's room to get a punch back here? What if there's room to get this and that? There's not room. I took this off that goes on here. Don't do that. It's a waste of time. But you know, if you don't know, you just try different things, right? So what you need to do is just sledgehammer on the end, carefully though, and then eventually what will happen is that these will come out together. They'll pound out together, and what is not supposed to happen happens. These are connected rather than this staying inside of here. Then you'll take it, and like I was showing you over there, you'll be able to use your little tap, and here, let me get this right here. Tap, 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 tap. It's going to be kind of hard to show with one hand, but you know what I mean, right? And you're going to be able to get those separated. So once you get them separated, then everything is pretty good. You're going to be able to take that steel sleeve and you're going to be able to hammer it back in, and you're not going to have any issues. Then when you go to put this back in, sand both this as well as the inside of this, apply some anti-seize, put it back together, finish your job. Copa City, okay? Now the problem is that what I did is I forgot on the second time, I forgot this nut here, this bolt, sorry. Because when you're under the car, you're going to see it. It's going to be very obvious because you're going to be looking at it like that. And you're going to remember it and you're going to say, okay, I got to take that off. But when I had this new transmission come, it came to me on a pallet. I bought it from a real nice guy. It included both shafts as well as the transfer case, everything, a package deal. And I didn't remember that bolt because I was just standing over it and I undid those bolts. I took off the transfer case. I was looking at it like this and I just started sledgehammering. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Because the tip of this bolt, and in the process it cracked. You can see just where it cracked down here and then across, which happens to follow that inside the way that it's cast. It wasn't a big, I'll put a photo up. It wasn't a big crack, and to be brutally honest, you could probably just JB weld it, but I wanted to do it right, so I taught myself how to weld aluminum. I have welded aluminum using AC TIG in a welding class before, but I did not have access to AC TIG, so I tried these sticks right here. These are 4043 aluminum sticks. Got some pots from the Goodwill. Make sure they're actually aluminum because there's plenty of metals that look like aluminum that aren't. You can see near the end, these are my later welds. I was getting good results, minimizing burn through. However, the reason that I got those good results was following another video I watched from Jody at Welding Tips and Tricks, where he takes these and rather than using them in the normal stick process of striking and stick welding, he uses them as filler rod to supplement DC TIG not having that AC for the cleaning. So he used these and they got good, as you can see, I got pretty good results here. The problem though is when you go over here, you can't preheat the transfer case as much as you can preheat the pots. Because with the pot, there's not that much metal there. You use your torch, it gets pretty warm, it lays down nice. This is so much metal. There's all this steel in here and all this aluminum and all that. You're just not going to get the preheat you need. So I'd recommend you try and dip it, and if it balls up, you're not nearly hot enough. When it starts to actually lay in there, I did not get the penetration that I wanted. It's kind of hard to show here on camera. That's why it's got this sort of lumpy stacked appearance. But I got, trust me, when I was hammering this sleeve in, I broke a couple of boards in half doing this. If this weld was going to crack, it would have cracked while I was hammering this in, because now that this sleeve is in here, this sleeve bears all of that force and all that weight there from whatever shaking or whatever might be going on through that shaft. I have no doubt this is going to survive, but there you go. You can weld aluminum without AC TIG if you know a few tricks. I also replaced this bearing preemptively, or seal, sorry. There's the part number. I'll also put an OEM part number up because all of that heat, I didn't want to risk this seal being compromised from the heat. You can see this is brand new, whereas that one is a golden color from the oil staining it over time, the gear oil. But that's pretty much the full story. Is you're not going to be able to get the shaft out because it's going to be seized. The bearing is going to be seized to the sleeve, and then the sleeve is going to be press fit into the case the way it's supposed to be. You're going to have to take the transfer case off. Then you're going to be able to hammer both the sleeve and the shaft out together. Then you're going to take the sleeve and you're going to hammer it off of the bearing. You're going to clean those surfaces up. You're going to hammer this back in, and then you're going to when you put the shaft back in, you can add a little anti-seize or whatever, and then hopefully they won't corrode together in the future. That's my hope. I will say too, for removing this seal here, I tried the old Harbor Freight puller set here. It did not work at all. What I ended up doing is just taking a round punch and hammering on one side of it pretty hard, and it just started to rotate kind of like that and flip in, and then I was able to pull it out. I also replaced the rear main seal under there while I was in there. I'll put a photo up. I used the screw method on that. That actually worked out pretty nice. In this case, I had plenty of access, no reason not to, right? So that's more or less my conclusion here. You can say, oh yes, and I forgot the spring. So what happens is, not this one, but on the good one, I hammered it out of the transfer case and I damaged these splines, okay? It's not focusing on them, but I damaged the splines, and so I was trying to fix the splines, so I used a little Dremel to Dremel them out. And then I took it and I was test fitting it by sliding it into here and then like that. Now you want to be really careful, okay? Because I was going a little bit too forceful and a little bit at the wrong angle. And this is the spring that was in the seal on the bad transmission. You can see what happened is I actually caught the spring on the splines and I really screwed this spring up. Now luckily I don't care because that's just a core at this point that I'm going to go and sell or whatever, I have no use for it. I'm not going to rebuild it myself, but there's a spring in all of these seals, and if you catch that spring when you're screwing around, you honestly want to make sure all of your springs are still in when you reassemble everything. There's going to be a spring on this side in there. There's the spring on this one. Anywhere you see a seal, you know, these have bigger springs, but there's springs on them. Another thing, the last thing that I forgot too, when you're putting the transmission back in, there's these alignment pins, okay? They look like this right here, and they press fit into both the engine and the transmission case, so that then when you put them together, they align up perfectly, versus these bolts have a little bit of wiggle. They wouldn't be exact enough. So the alignment pins, if you buy a transmission from a guy and you don't check the alignment pins, I think, where does the other one go? Let's see. It goes, I think it's there. But anyways, you can see on the engine, I already have those alignment pins in my engine. And so what happened is I actually went to put this back up before I filmed this video. I was going to get this bolted in before making my video, and I forgot that these alignment pins, I didn't realize that they were both in the transmission and the engine. This wouldn't happen if you were removing your own transmission, but if you buy a new one and it also, the pins happen to stay in on both sides, you're not going to, you know what I'm saying, you're not going to be able to get it in. The pins are going to hit each other. There's also 2 alignment pins that go on there, so that's pretty basic stuff. But anyways, rambling on long enough. Another big tip, make sure that you have this motor mount here that goes on the back of the transmission connected when you put the subframe up. Otherwise, you're going to have to drop it again to get these 2 studs through. Ask me how I know. And don't forget to put the bolt through the motor mount. Otherwise, you're going to be dropping the subframe again because you can't get that bolt through with everything up in place since it hits the power steering rack mount. And the last tip of the day is, after you get everything assembled and you go on a road test, if it feels a little bit slow to shift or lurchy, don't just assume it's an old transmission and that's how it's supposed to be. Go in with either TechStream or a similarly high-level scan tool and reset the transmission's memory. This isn't going to be something you can do by just unhooking the battery, and it's going to make it go from okay to amazing. At least in my case, it really did help a lot. Well, that's about it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment. Every time you comment, that's one less bolt that's going to be rusty, so don't forget about that, all right? And, you know, we got lots of more interesting content coming up, more work on this car, maybe not. But we got Corolla work, we have Tacoma, lots going on with that, all types of things. So get subscribed if you want more fun videos and interesting shots. See you next time. Bye. This thing's a race car, as you can tell by the carbon fiber here gives it away. Definitely a race car.